Have you ever looked around lately and just thought, man, why does everything feel so hard? Why is everyone, maybe even you, feeling so incredibly stretched, both financially and emotionally? Well, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the true cost of what we're going to call the GDP machine. We're going straight to the source material to unpack the structural, built-in reasons behind all this modern societal struggle. We're not just looking at the surface-level symptoms you see on the evening news. Nope, we're going way deeper, looking right at the actual blueprint of our society. It's time to figure out the root causes of our collective exhaustion. So let's jump right in.
So let's kick things off with a massive question. Why is there so much societal struggle today? I mean, really reflect on the daily grind for a second. We see the symptoms everywhere, don't we? We're talking skyrocketing stress levels as people are out there juggling 2, maybe 3 jobs. We see persistent crime in our neighborhoods, and honestly, just deep-seated conflict playing out in our communities and on our feeds literally every single day. The weight of the whole shebang can feel completely overwhelming. But what if the root of all this struggle isn't what we've been conditioned to believe? What if we've actually been looking at this problem completely upside down? Look, it's human nature to want to point fingers. When bad behavior or profound struggle pops up, the standard narrative usually tells us, hey, it's all about individual choice. We're told it's just laziness, poor decision-making, or, a lack of personal values. But the research from our source material, it tells a completely different story. It shows that these deeply embedded issues actually stem from poverty and a constant, inescapable state of chronic stress. So what we often rush to label as a moral failing is in reality a deeply ingrained environmental symptom. When people are pushed to the absolute brink, their behavior is reflecting a survival instinct, not some inherent flaw in their character. Which brings us to a seriously stark realization from the text. Society doesn't look to build fundamental wellness for everyone. Just let that sink in for a second. It's a heavy thought. We almost always assume the system is broken because so many folks are struggling, right? We think, there's got to be a glitch in how things are running. But this concept flips the script entirely. What if the system isn't broken at all? What if, and stay with me here, it's doing exactly what it was designed to do from the very beginning, and our individual wellness just isn't on the blueprint? Okay, so if our wellness isn't on the blueprint, what actually is? Well, our current system's primary design function is to create greater consumption of goods so that gross domestic product, or GDP, can just keep rising year after year. That is the true core objective. Not human well-being, not your happiness, not your health. So that lack of fundamental wellness we feel, it's not a bug, it is the actual intended feature. We're operating inside a framework that is highly optimized for consumption and relentless economic output, but it's entirely unoptimized for the actual human beings living inside it. To really wrap our heads around this, think of our entire society like a giant, intricately built factory machine. And what is this machine built to pump out? GDP widgets, endless economic growth at literally any cost. In this massive factory analogy, human beings are basically just the small metal gears turning the machine. And here is the brutal truth. The machine doesn't care if those gears get ground down to dust. It doesn't care if you burn out from the gig economy, or if you're pulling your hair out barely making rent, just as long as that production line keeps moving and the GDP keeps going up. The system inherently prioritizes the sheer output of the machine over the health and sanity of the gears themselves. And you know what happens next? This creates a highly predictable pipeline of systemic failure because the system puts GDP above absolutely everything else. Everyday people are forced to fiercely compete with each other just to secure their most basic human needs. Finding housing, getting food, securing healthcare, survival basically becomes this daily high-stakes contest. And being in that constant survival mode, it inevitably causes chronic stress to compound on a massive scale across the population. And the result of all that sustained, relentless pressure, a devastating rise in crime and mental health issues. It is a direct chain reaction. The intense stress of navigating a system built for capital, not care, literally breaks the people trapped inside it. But wait, it gets heavier, because this damage isn't just an isolated, one-off event. It ripples forward through time. The source text points out that upbringings shaped by the heavy shadow of parents' chronic stress have a profound, long-lasting impact. We're talking about generational trauma that practically hardwires an increase in crime and mental health issues over time. When parents are stuck in that relentless factory machine, fighting endlessly just to keep their heads above water, that constant state of panic biologically and emotionally gets passed right down to their kids. It essentially creates a toxic environment that breeds struggle before the next generation even gets a chance to start. But here is where the data actually gives us a massive light bulb moment. It shows an incredibly powerful inverse relationship.
When basic needs like housing and healthcare are scarce and super expensive, crime rates are extremely high. I mean, desperation drives behavior, right? On the flip side, when those exact same basic needs are actually affordable and accessible, crime rates plummet. The takeaway from the research here is absolutely crystal clear. You effectively reduce crime and violence simply by reducing poverty. It really is that straightforward. If you want a safer, more stable society, the answer isn't necessarily more policing, it's decisively less poverty.
So to get there, we need a fundamental transition. We have to purposefully move away from this model of intense competition, where we're forced to fight tooth and nail just to survive. Because that competitive panic is exactly what drives the isolation and conflict we're seeing. Instead, we really need to shift our focus towards community. Healing society requires building healthy communities where basic survival is treated as an absolute given right, not some stressful, exhausting competition. Seriously, when people aren't terrified of losing their shelter or going bankrupt just from getting sick, the entire temperature of society instantly cools down.
Okay, so how do we actually execute a shift like that? Well, the source material lays out some very practical, highly actionable policy shifts: affordable housing, affordable healthcare, accessible education, and deliberately fostering healthy communities. And let's be clear, these aren't just nice to have perks or some utopian dream. According to the data, these are the literal mechanical levers we need to pull to transition our society away from being a GDP-focused machine. You reduce poverty and completely mitigate its destructive side effects by making these exact structural shifts. It's really about designing a system that works for the gears, instead of grinding them away.
Bringing it all together, everything we've unpacked today really boils down to one core goal: fundamental wellness. The source material is remarkably clear about this pathway forward. If we can successfully flip our system's primary design function away from endless, mindless consumption and point it directly toward the fundamental wellness of every individual, we can get incredibly close to ridding society of the conflict and chronic struggle that literally none of us want to deal with. It's entirely about changing the objective of the machine we live inside and finally deciding that humanity is worth way more than just its economic output. Which leaves us with a final, pretty provocative thought for you to chew on. If our current system is strictly designed for consumption and constantly pushing up GDP, what would a society completely designed for your personal well-being actually look like? Imagine waking up tomorrow in a community where your basic needs simply weren't a daily terrifying battle. How would that structurally change your stress levels, your relationships, and really the trajectory of your entire life? Take that question with you today. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time as we keep using the facts to break down the ideas that shape our world.